harder to do than today's current system post-17th Amendment, where I've got to just go lobby these two individuals now. It would have been way harder before the 17th Amendment. So, yay for special interest groups. They got a lot more sovereignty than they had pre-17th Amendment. Am I right?
Totally. Because those state legislators, they knew they were beholden to, these 29,000 people in their home district, and so it was a little bit tougher to buy them out, because they could be recalled much easier. It didn't take long to get these, like you were saying, a few thousand people, or a few hundred to a few thousand even. People riled up in their district, and they were out of there. And so the people had a lot better, in my opinion, a lot better control of what went on back in Washington prior to the 17th Amendment. But because of a few ripples in the system, we passed the 17th Amendment, and the ripples now are 100 times larger. I mean, you just look at well, even going back, say, like to the Patriot Act. Right. That was passed like lightning. We don't have time to debate this. The Patriot Act would not have gotten through in a matter of months, maybe years. Even being a huge matter of national security, those senators would have sat down and read the entire thing to see how it impacted their state specifically.
Yeah, they would have said, whoa, I represent the interests of my state. Well, really now, U.S. senators don't represent states. They think they do, but they really represent geographical regions with a certain number of people in it. It's not like John Adams said, Massachusetts is my country. It's, I got these how many ever million people. Now I've got to cater to public opinion. I've got to take in all this special interest money. And that's really the way they look at it now. I'm not saying they don't care at all what their state legislature says, but honestly, they're kind of free to do whatever. They're democratically elected now. And let me just emphasize again, the founders didn't want a democracy. What's that quote that you often use, Randall, about democracies? About their life? Well, that they're short in their life and that their death is often violent.
Their time on the stage of life is short, and it's always a violent eruption. And it always ends in tyranny. Every single time you've had a democracy, a true democracy, it's always ended in tyranny, because the majority would rule over the minority until the minority would revolt, and you'd have a massive amount of war and bloodshed, and then you'd have some tyrant spring out of the mix to bring peace.
Oh, sweet dictator. We human beings always look to our politicians or our political leaders to save us. And we see that this is not what the founders wanted. They didn't want democracy. And so, just an aside, when the politicians out there, your local, your state, and your national politicians, including presidents, say we are democracy, look, this is the wrong direction and not what the founders. So please don't call the U.S. a democracy. We were meant to be a constitutional republic, and so that's another misunderstanding. And essentially that's one of the philosophies that took the country towards the 17th Amendment, was wanting to be more, quote-unquote, democratic. Well, now you see what democracy often leads to mobocracy. Did we read the text of the 17th Amendment, Randall?
No, we haven't. Will you read that for us, Thomas?
I will, and I'll contrast it with the original. The 17th Amendment says this: the Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state. Okay, that's the same as the previous verbiage. Here's the difference: elected by the people thereof. Before the 17th Amendment, it said chosen by the legislature thereof. So there we go. Instead of legislature, now we change it to the people. We're more democratic, and here we have all these problems. One other thing, Randall, is I want to talk about the contradiction between the 10th and the 17th Amendment. What's the 10th Amendment, Randall?
The 10th Amendment designates that all rights which have not been specifically given to the federal government are held to the states, or the people themselves. So it
Okay.
says the states have rights, and they have, if it hasn't been given to you in the Constitution, federal government, hands off, because it's the state's jurisdiction at this point.
So we had about 18 enumerated powers in the Constitution originally that said, okay, federal government does this. Like we coin money, we make treaties, we wage war, we do these few very specific things. And everything else is to the power of the state, period. I mean, the 10th Amendment says this. Okay, well, here's the thing. I look at amendments to the Constitution like cogs. They're all interconnected. Well, if you put in a cog that's broken or going the opposite way, well, it's going to cause a problem. I say the 17th Amendment contradicts or conflicts with the 10th, because who's there to fight for state rights now? Who's there to fight for the 10th Amendment as the founding fathers put it in? Well, not your U.S. senators. They don't represent states anymore. They represent geographical regions with certain numbers of people. But they're not there to fight for the country of Utah or Massachusetts or California. They're there to get popularly or democratically elected. So to me, the 10th and the 17th Amendments of the Constitution conflict. So they kind of run against each other. If that's true, then that causes a problem, and I think we're illustrating what all those problems are. But, Randall, we could talk about problems all day long. You can listen to the popular media, the fringe media, if you want to. But let's talk about solutions, unless I've missed some other unintended consequence. Let's go into the solution section, because what do we, the people, do about this amendment?
First off, I think the people, especially those listening to this, they shouldn't just take our opinion and say, oh, that's what it is. I think they should study it out for themselves. The only way they're going to be passionate enough to do anything about this is for them to gain understanding about it and be able to, intelligently converse with others about the hazards that the 17th Amendment brought to the United States. The other thing that they may want to do is to look at ways to say, okay, I've acknowledged this is a problem, but how do we resolve it? What can we do to resolve it? Well, a couple ways they can do that is firstly, an amendment, a repealing of the 17th Amendment. One way that they can do that is by contacting Congress and trying to get Congress to then pass an amendment that would then go through the Senate. And obviously, just like in 1913, it's probably going to hit the same roadblock where the Senate just doesn't want to pass it because they're okay with what the status quo is right now, which is their popular election. They know it's known territory. But another way to do that is to call for a constitutional convention, which is actually called by the states. Now, if you talk with your local representatives and help them understand what the 17th Amendment is and how it affects their power, their political power, the rights of the state, which they represent, being elected by you. If you talk to them about that, I guarantee that most of them, as soon as they get it, they're going to catch on fire about the possibility of regaining that control. And I believe it's two-thirds of the states. If two-thirds of the states call for a constitutional convention, the Congress is obligated under the Constitution to call a constitutional convention specifically for the passage or the reworking of an amendment that they're calling for, like this, to repeal the 17th Amendment. So that's probably the most plausible path, and it's one that individuals that are listening to this can get involved in because they can talk with their state representatives. They can say, hey, 17th Amendment's bad juju. We've got to do something about it. And then they can go and talk with the rest of their peers at the state House and the state Senate and start to make things happen. What do you think, Thomas?
Well, I've heard one other suggestion which I like. Look, I realize this discussion is a little advanced for most people, not because we're so smart, but because we study it. At least we've studied it for a while now. I read an article by a fellow named James Ure, and I found it on the George Wythe University website. And the article's called, You Scratch My Back and I'll Scratch Yours, Why the Federal Marriage Amendment Should Also Repeal